to get naughty, get my rocks on, eat popcorn, watch you move your body to the pop song that I'm singing, ding-a-lingin', funky beats ringing, everybody swinging in the place as I kick the J-A-Z-Z-Y style, R&B, mixing it with the hip-hop swing beat, champagne in my hand, it won't be long till I'm gone. It's just the same old song.
It's just a freestyle, meanwhile we keep the beat kicking. Sweat dripping, girlies in the limo eating chicken. Oops, don't get the grease on your pantyhose. I love you, Rover, move over, I gotta blow my nose, sneezing, but still I'm pleasing all the slimmies. Pull out my Jimmy, time to get busy with a Jenny. If it's good and plenty, don't you know? There I go, there I go, there I go. But I don't go nowhere without my gym hat. What I'm rapping is if she's clapping, then I'm strapping, cause I'm smarter than that. And then, girlie, maybe we can get along. Cutie after cutie, it's just the same old song. It's the same old song, y'all.
Same song.
It's just the same old song.
It's the same song. Money big, the freaky deaky, the squeaky wicky up and down. Well, as a matter of fact, I'll be right back, I gotta take a leaky. So I'm draining entertainers, but I got fame, and the bases I touch, too much for me to try to be naming. Hey yo, you saw me on cable and grin, I busted in and I was going to win. Like Clark Gable back in Oakland, it's the same old song for Sporty Shorty, same freckles and hat, drinking the same 40.
Hypothetical, political, lyrical, miracle whip, just like butter. My rhymes are legit, cause I'm the Humpty, not Humpty Dumpty, but Humpty Hump. Here a hump, there a hump, everywhere I'm Humpty Hump.
Shut up and just listen, not dissing, don't get me wrong. But to me it's just the same old song, so just watch. Cause my name is Shock, I like to rock and you can't stop this. Tupac, go ahead and rock this.
Now I clown around when I hang around with the underground. Girls used to frown, say I'm down when I come around. Gas me, and when they pass me, they used to diss me, harass me. But now they ask me if they can kiss me. Get some fame, people change, wanna live their life high. Same song can't go wrong if I play the nice guy.
Claiming fame must have changed now that we became strong.
I remain still the
Why
same,
too?
cause it's the same song.
Been all around the world, it's the same song.
Same old song, y'all.
Been all around the world, same song.
Shout out, check out, shout out, stop. It's just the same old song. Yeah, Humpty Hump in the house, y'all. And you know what? It's the same old song. All around the world, same song.
In the last video, I introduced the subject of fraud, or the concept of fraud. We talked about insurance fraud, and we started talking about workers' compensation fraud. I presented for the first time the three different variations for workers' compensation fraud. Again, workers' compensation fraud, generally speaking, takes these three variations. It's worker-based, it's medical provider-based, or it's employer-based. In this video, I want to talk specifically about worker-based workers' compensation fraud. This is where a worker commits fraud against an employer and or the insurance company. Research suggests that only about 1 to 2% of workers' comp cases are going to be fraudulent. This particular statistic is taken from a very high quality documentary. It's part of the PBS Frontline series, and the title of the documentary was The Myth of Workers' Compensation Fraud, PBS Frontline, A Dangerous Business. Again, according to research done by the producers of this documentary, only 1 to 2% of workers' compensation cases are fraudulent, involve any type of worker-based fraud. Let me clarify that. Only 1 to 2% are worker-based fraud. Again, there's those other two variations also that we need to consider. But let's look at what worker-based workers' comp fraud can look like. Some examples or some different forms that it can take. A worker can claim an injury or file a claim for an injury that occurred away from work. I think I've used the example of the guy that rode bulls on the weekend, injured himself, showed up on Monday, claimed he had a back injury, I forgot what it was, and tried to file a workers' comp claim. Now, let me back up a little bit. This is one of my experiences in 20 years working in the safety profession. I can count on one hand the number of cases that were fraudulent, and this is one of them. Now, there may have been some others that kind of flew under my radar that weren't detected, but I don't think there were that many more. I would say you could count on 10 fingers. No more than 10 fingers would be needed to count all of the workers' comp fraud that I saw in 20 years, and that includes those that flew under the radar and those that I knew of. This is one of them. Again, actually, we caught it. It wasn't. He attempted to file a fraudulent workers' comp claim. A worker may claim an injury that really didn't occur, a false claim of injury. A lot of times when these false injury claims are made, they're soft tissue injuries that are very hard to diagnose, that don't show up on x-rays or other medical diagnostic procedures. It's hard to prove or disprove soft tissue injuries in many cases. They could just be claimed, hey, my back hurts. I injured my back doing X, Y, or Z. I've got a back injury. They really don't, but they claim that the injury occurred. Worker claims a new injury when it was a pre-existing injury. Maybe you hire someone at your company that injured themselves at their previous employer. They never filed a claim with their previous employer. Maybe they worked for an employer that wouldn't listen to them, wouldn't pay attention to the claim, or whatever the case may be, but they end up with your company, and now they're filing a claim for a shoulder injury that occurred at their previous employers. We had this happen with a truck driver. This is one of the other cases in my experience. And I think, I might have mentioned this one also. This was a truck driver that claimed a back injury. Now this one, because we couldn't directly prove that the injury was really due to his football playing days, we didn't pursue it. We didn't deny the claim. Insurance company didn't do any investigations or attempt to deny the claim. But I really think this driver, his neck and back problems were because of his football playing days. He was an all-state running back. He played at Oklahoma State University. In some casual asking around, investigating, looking into his past a little bit, he had a history of neck injury, back injury when he was a football player. And rumor was that's why he dropped out of Oklahoma State, was because of the neck injury. And we ended up paying for that injury as a workers' comp claim when he worked for us. Another form of worker-based fraud would be a worker that has a legitimate injury, but they milk it for all they can get out of it. They try to get as many weeks as possible of indemnity benefits. They try to drag it out as long as they can. They may feel just fine, but because they enjoy being off work and getting a check, even though it's not as much as they would normally earn, they enjoy that arrangement that they're in. They don't want to go back to work, so they will continue to milk this legitimate injury even after they've healed up and could go back to work. Related to this would be inflating the severity of an injury. It may, in essence, be a minor injury, and all the diagnostics indicate it's a minor injury, but they claim it's more severe. The pain is greater. Their amount of functionality is greatly limited, or their functionality is greatly limited, more greatly limited than it should be, based upon what the diagnostic procedures indicate. Intentional injury. One worker, I think, and I might have mentioned this one also earlier in the semester. One worker in my career, I think, intentionally injured themselves repeatedly, pretty severe injuries, and they did this so they could receive the workers' compensation settlement that they knew they would receive if they lost a finger. This worker, in multiple incidents, each incident they lost one finger. They ended up, I believe, losing 3 fingers in 3 different incidents. And I forgot what they're. I have to go back and look at the charts that we looked at earlier in the semester. But you're looking, $3,000-4,000 probably for a finger. You lose a finger, you get that. Yeah, it's in Oklahoma state law. You get a settlement when you lose a finger. This worker always had financial problems, always had some type of drama going on in his life. If I remember correctly, he had 2 missing from one hand and 2 missing from the other hand. And they were never, it wasn't like the index finger or the thumb. It was like the pinky finger and I believe the middle finger on one hand, then the pinky finger on the other hand. It was fingers that weren't considered as essential to be able to function and use your hands. This worker, sad case with this worker, again, I'm not mentioning any names. This worker had so many problems going on. I love the guy to death, and I even kind of overlooked what I thought was intentional incidents. And these were not incidents that you could prove that he did it intentionally, but I think it probably was. My instinct, my intuition tells me that he was doing this on purpose for that settlement. But again, to make a sad story even more sad, the worker ended up committing suicide right around Christmas. It would probably have been 2012 or so. He had left the company we were both working for. He had left and gone to another company, and he wasn't there very long. And right around Christmas, he shot himself, which that's in the construction industry with all the travel, the long hours, the no days off, those types of pressures placed on workers, you do see a higher rate of suicide in the construction industry. And there's other things that can go along with that also, not just the long work hours and working away from home. It's that particular industry places a lot of stress on workers, not so much on the safety people, not so much on management, but the workers that are out in the weather day in and day out doing the job. It's pretty stressful for them. But anyhow, that's these are some examples of the types or forms that a worker-based fraud case could take. These are some red flags that we should look out for, watch out for when it comes to worker-based fraud. A Monday morning injury could be they hurt themselves over the weekend, and it's really not work-related. An injury that's reported after work status has changed, or the employee, there's rumors going around that work could change. Maybe there's going to be a layoff. Maybe there's going to be a strike. Maybe they hear through the grapevine that they're getting ready to be terminated. If any of those instances are true, if any of that's going on, we might want to look more closely at those injuries that occur around these periods when there's a strike, a layoff, termination. Maybe the employee is just transferred to a new position that they don't really like, so an injury occurs, so they don't have to go to that new position. Now, keep in mind, there are legitimate Monday morning injuries, and there are legitimate injuries around a strike or a layoff or these types of events. So just because these events occur does not mean it's going to be a fraudulent case. If there's a delay in reporting an injury, let's say an employee comes to you 2 weeks after the injury supposedly occurred and said, hey, yeah, I smashed my thumb 2 weeks ago and I just didn't say anything about it. That's a red flag. You need to investigate that a little more closely. New hires that are injured after just a few days. Keep in mind, worker-based workers' comp fraud is very rare, but there are a minority of individuals out there that are job hopping from employer to employer. They work a few days and get hurt in their efforts to benefit from the workers' comp benefits that can be available to them. So another red flag: new hired injured after a few days. History of claims with other employers. They claim a soft tissue injury, but there's no objective evidence that they have a real injury. The symptoms, the injury is invisible to examination procedures. And that's why we see a lot of fraudulent soft tissue injuries, because there can be real injuries that don't show up very well on x-rays or from other examination procedures. An injury to a worker that's disgruntled. If you have a disgruntled worker and all of a sudden he's upset about where he's working and how many hours he's working, he's always complaining, then all of a sudden he has an injury, that needs to be investigated more thoroughly. Also, it could be legitimate, but you need to investigate these red flag instances. There's a claim of injury, like maybe a concussion, without exam data backing up that claim of injury, without examination data indicating the presence of the injury. This kind of goes along with the soft tissue injuries that we spoke of here. Any injury when there's not objective examination data indicating the presence of the injury. Any kind of subjective data or injury not verified with data. Or cases where the employee's not sure how they were injured. They just hurt and they don't know why. And they think it was at work, but they don't know. It may be legitimate, but it needs to be investigated. Employee refuses an examination or diagnostic procedure. Again, this is a little bit more in your face as far as a major red flag. If they won't let anyone x-ray them, that's a pretty serious red flag. There aren't any witnesses to the incident that they claim resulted in the injury. Another red flag: if they know a lot of attorneys, or they have relationships, or of relationships they have with attorneys, especially attorneys that have a history of working compensation claims. Employee is not at home when they should be recovering. Let's say the doctor sends the employee home, tells that employee to rest, stay at home, no lifting, no walking, or minimal walking, those types of restrictions, but the employee is not at home when they should be recovering. That's another indicator of potential fraud. Doesn't prove fraud, but it's an indicator that needs to be investigated. Speaking of prevention of workers' comp fraud, what are some things that we can do? And a lot of what we've talked about this semester, good workers' comp management goes along with this. You're going to see some review, some repeat of what we've already talked about. Adequate monitoring of the work site is important. If it's a mobile industry like construction or oil field work, we're starting to see more and more companies use video or some type of closed circuit television monitoring of the work location. And there's one company that specializes in providing cameras for these types of workplaces. They will set up the company with cameras so that someone sitting in an office in Seattle can monitor workers who are in, let's say, Texas. But some type of monitoring needs to take place, and modern technology allows that capability in just about every workplace. We're seeing more and more construction companies go with this camera monitoring technology. We need active and involved, engaged frontline supervisors. That's an important part of monitoring also. It's an important part of safety management, getting the superintendents, the foremen, the lead individuals involved in the process. And then safety personnel. If you're a safety manager, you need to be, as much as you can, out where the work is taking place. Not just looking for workers' comp fraud or to prevent workers' comp fraud. I mean, that's how we prevent injuries, is by being out there, building relationships, coaching workers, providing workers with the gear they need, those types of things. Background inquiries also. We've talked about background inquiries. We look at workers' compensation claims histories. And we've talked about this some, and I'll talk about it a little more because it's kind of a sticky legal area when we talk about workers' comp background inquiries. Another thing to look for is deception on a worker's application. If a worker lies on their application, that, to me, that would be an indicator that you shouldn't be hiring them. Or maybe they've used deception on other new hire documents, or they're evasive. They can't provide you with something that HR needs for the new hire documentation. Anything like that would be grounds to not hire them if you notice deception in any way. And speaking of deception on application, how are you gonna know they're deceptive? Well, if they say they worked for Aon Manufacturing on their application, that was their previous experience. Well, you should call Aon and to see if they worked there. You should do a background inquiry. Background inquiries go beyond just workers' compensation. There are so many employers out there, they don't do any kind of background checks on their new hires, and that can be a fatal error on their part. If you ask for previous employment history on the application, someone needs to follow up on that. It doesn't, at least do a spot check to verify what they're putting on the application is true. If they say they have a high school diploma from Wagner High School, well, verify that, just to make sure that they're not being deceptive in any way. And that goes along with work history. If they have a history where they've been employed at a lot of different places, a lot of different companies, a lot of different jobs, job hopping can be an indicator of a problem that could manifest itself as workers' comp fraud. Fitness for duty physical examinations. With these examinations, these are pre-work physical examinations, and we're going to be looking for signs of a previous injury. We're going to be determining from this physical examination if they are fit to perform the job for which they are applying. Now, and this pre-employment physical examination should include a pre-employment drug screen. And that's pretty commonplace, even for smaller companies now, to have that pre-employment drug screen, as we discussed in a previous unit. Aggressive return to work modified duty programs let workers know that if they're injured, we're going to try to keep them working. It's not automatically going to be a paid vacation. We spent a whole unit talking about that. And there are some other things you can do. Sign in, sign out sheets. Be careful using sign in, sign out sheets. That they can be useful, but they can also be more trouble than they're worth. And when I say sign in, sign out sheets, we're talking about they sign in the morning, and when they sign in, they're saying, "Hey, I'm fit, I'm ready to work, I'm not injured." At the end of the day, when you have them sign out, when they sign out, they're saying, "Hey, I was not injured today. I don't have any complaints at the end of the day about injury." This can help prevent them coming back the next day and saying, "I injured myself yesterday." You just go back to the form. Well, I signed out yesterday, or you signed out yesterday indicating you weren't hurt. Now you're saying you're hurt. What's the deal here? And it gives you grounds for investigating that in more detail. But the more paperwork we add into a workplace, sometimes can be counterproductive. So it's not on the face, it's not a bad idea, but in practice, it can be additional paperwork, an additional pain in the rear for management having to deal with the sign-in, sign-out sheets. Let's talk more about workers' compensation background inquiries. These can only be conducted after an offer of employment has been extended. You cannot use the findings from a workers' compensation background inquiry as grounds for not employing a person or not hiring a person. Previous workers' compensation claims alone cannot be used to deny employment or terminate an existing employee. We need to make sure that we are compliant with the Americans Disability Act. And if we do it correctly, we can be compliant with the ADA. Before we do the background inquiry, the applicant must sign a release allowing potential employers to conduct background screening services, or to contact background screening services and conduct these background screenings, inquiries. Some benefits of using the workers' compensation history: identify deception on an application. We combine the background inquiry with a question on the application. If we find that the employee lied on the application, they said that they didn't have a previous injury, but we find out from the background inquiry that they did have a previous injury, that can be legal grounds for termination. Not because they were injured, but because they lied on their application. Another benefit or use of background inquiries: so we can ensure that workers are assigned to jobs that they are physically capable of performing. If we find from the background inquiry that the worker has a history of back injuries, well, we don't want to assign them to the warehouse, lifting 100-pound bags of feed or 50-pound blocks of salt or whatever it is that we're asking them to physically, manually lift and carry. That's not a good job for someone with a history of back injuries. So the background inquiry, along with the fitness for duty examination, helps us get workers in the right jobs. We want to avoid assigning a task to a worker that could aggravate a previous injury. And I'm not going to open these links here, but here's some additional information about workers' compensation background inquiries. There are services, there are companies out there that will do workers' comp background inquiries for employers. And that if your company wants to do workers' background inquiries, workers' comp background inquiries, they should use a company like HireRight. And there are several others as well. Again, all company procedures regarding background inquiries, hiring, or terminations should be regularly reviewed by an attorney. Annual review would be best, but at least every 2 years or so, you need to HR and safety, if safety is related to any of these policies, you need to sit down with an attorney and go through your policies. Laws change. Something may have changed. Maybe what was legal in 2023 is not going to be legal in 2024 because of a legal change that's occurred. Now, I mentioned how we can use a question on the application to identify deception when it comes to workers' compensation. And here's an example. Now, again, I think I've shown you this before, all of my classes, and everything's running together at this point. But let me mention it again. If you have seen this before, just ignore it if you already know it. And what we're doing here is we're asking one simple question on this application. Have you ever been injured on the job and had a workers' compensation claim? If they answer no, that's fine. If they answer yes, that's fine. Really, if they have, they should answer yes. And honestly, and if they do answer yes, I mean, you can't use that as grounds for not hiring them. But let's say they answer no, they've never been injured, never had a workers' comp claim. But you go and do the workers' comp background inquiry, and they come back, and that inquiry comes back as well in 2016, they had a workers' comp claim and they were off work for 3 weeks with a knee injury. Well, they lied on their application. That deception on their application is grounds for immediate termination if the employer wants to pursue that action against the employee. And this practice and this application that you see here, this was all reviewed by a workers' compensation attorney in 2008. The attorney said it was legal to ask about workers' comp, but it could not affect the hiring decision. Again, this was 2008. As far as I know, this is still an acceptable practice from a legal standpoint, but if you go to work for a company, your company wants to do something like this, this does need to be explored in more detail with an attorney. The attorney needs to give you the green light, because if something's changed in the law, this could get the employer in some legal hot water. So what happens when we suspect that we have a worker who is being deceptive, that they really aren't injured and they're milking their workers' compensation benefits, or whatever the case may be? We think there's some type of fraud going on. You, as a safety manager, generally that's not going to be your responsibility to do that investigation. If you think there may be fraud going on, notify the insurance carrier. The insurance carrier may then hire a private investigator to conduct some type of surveillance on the claimant, the worker that we think may be involved in the fraudulent claim. Also, the State Workers' Compensation Commission in the state of Oklahoma may be involved. There's actually a hotline. The Oklahoma Workers' Compensation Commission has a hotline for reporting suspected workers' compensation fraud. But generally, when it gets to this point, again, it's not going to be the safety professional. It's not going to be the safety manager. It's going to be a private investigator, or maybe the insurance company has an in-house investigator to investigate fraud. And I have a few videos here to show some of the types of evidence that can be obtained during these different fraud investigations. These are video clips. This first one that I'm going to show you here, this is a worker that claimed a back injury. He's on workers' compensation from his employer, and he has a side business renovating houses. And this is him. This is a video of him working in his side hustle, renovating houses, while he's off work receiving workers' compensation benefits from his other employer. There's no, I don't believe there's any sound with this, but let me go ahead and what we have going on here, we have a private investigator across the street with a video camera. And wait, if I remember correctly, the private investigator actually does end up going into this building where they're working and asking the guy some innocent questions, innocent in quotation marks. Here, let me just shut up and show you the video. Let me get into theater mode here. Zoom this out a little bit. And this guy has a back injury, if I remember correctly, and he's on workers' comp instead of being at home recuperating. And keep in mind, very rare, most workers and most workers' comp claims aren't going to be like this. That looks like some countertop. That thing probably weighs 100 pounds or more. That's not a very safe way of doing that, by the way. It's probably why he got hurt in the first place at his other employer, pulling crap like that. He's off work on workers' comp. And he got busted because of the private investigator. See if I can fast forward a little bit. There's more of that. Oh, here's another location. Looks like he's at a Home Depot here loading his truck. And showing your workers videos like this might, I mean, if you have that 1 out of 100 worker that might be tempted
possibly maybe renting this or buying this. Is there someone I
Okay, I'll stop there. And then this is where they're actually talking to the guy inside this, where they're working. But what I was saying, this videos like this might be a good thing to show workers, and that might dissuade the 1 out of 100 workers who's tempted to pull a workers' comp claim scheme. That might persuade him or her that's not a good idea, that they could get busted, because again there are investigations done when workers' comp fraud is suspected. Back up just a second.
possibly maybe renting this or buying this? Is there someone I can talk to about that?
No, you're speaking English. The guy you're talking about, the Jason, the number for the sign.
The 5261182?
Yeah, this is Jason. This is the owner.
He's the owner?
Yeah.
Okay. Is he coming back, or
I don't know,
Does
maybe.
he work here with you guys, or
What?
does he work here with you guys, or?
Yeah.
okay. So you guys pretty much are gutting this
Better
house,
check it
right?
out and-
Oh, can I check it out?
Yeah, check it out. The house.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
What are you guys doing down
This is
here?
out in the
Oh wow, you guys are putting in a whole
the
bathroom.
laundry.
Laundry room?
Yeah.
Is this waterproof?
Yeah.
It is waterproof?
No, don't waterproof.
Is that what you're doing, or?
No leaking, no. No leaking.
No leaking.
Before you guys started?
Okay. What else are you guys doing to it?
Started, or it did?
I don't know what you're making it. The guy is in the stove. Just come back in 10 minutes.
Okay, okay. Oh, wow. Did you guys do that?
Yeah.
Wow.
This is the jacuzzi. This is the jacuzzi.
That's gorgeous. I don't want to step on anything.
yeah.
No, that's right. I don't want to. I know you're working.
That was one of the investigators, probably a team of investigators. A lot of times there are going to be multiple people involved in the investigation. But that was one of the investigators talking to the gentleman that we had seen previously lifting the heavy loads and pushing that piece of countertop up to the second floor and so on. But these are the types of investigations that can occur when workers' compensation fraud is suspected. Let's look at one more here. This is also a worker who is off work with a back injury. Back up a little bit. Well, here's injuries: neck, back, hips, upper extremities. These were the restrictions from the doctor. She was supposed to be following these restrictions: no bending, lifting over 5 pounds, no twisting, no reaching. But the private investigator followed her into a Walmart or a Target or some type of retail store and just followed her around, took video of her doing all of these things that she wasn't supposed to be capable of doing. Bending. Reaching overhead. She needs some dog food that weighs more than 5 pounds. Busted. She's got some explaining to do. Now she's going to twist. Yeah, that weighs more than 5 pounds probably. And you get the point. You keep in mind, and I'm going to reiterate one more time, only 1 to 2% of fraudulent cases, or let me back up, I said that wrong. Only 1 to 2% of workers' comp cases involve any kind of fraud or any kind of worker-based fraud. In the next video, and it's going to be a short video, it's going to be the last video, we're going to take a quick look at the more serious forms of workers' comp fraud. And I say serious from a dollars and cents standpoint. We're going to talk about the types of workers' comp fraud that is much more costly than worker-based workers' comp fraud.